Welcome to the Communication Mastery Podcast with me, Mark Burlinson. We're tackling miscommunication with the power of understanding. We're growing our mastery of the foundation of teamwork and of all relationships. And so I want to ask you to help me spread the word about stronger, more effective communication by inviting some friends to listen along with you. Then discuss what you've learned and give me your feedback. What would you like to hear from us in future episodes so we can make this podcast even more effective? Thanks for joining me. Let's jump in. This week, let's talk about two changes that you can make in communication in your business. The one concerns our mindsets, and the other concerns the culture and environment that we create in which communication happens. Let me explain what I mean. Your team may be smart, but you're still finding that there are misfires. There still may be misunderstanding. Maybe things aren't going as well as you had expected. Even though they're a great team, they're very talented. The problem probably isn't their talent, it's the climate you've created. And again, that relates to those two factors I just mentioned, the mindset and the environment. Because miscommunication isn't neutral. Miscommunication is really important that we address it and not just ignore it and brush it under the carpet. Miscommunication causes lost deals. Miscommunication causes missed handoffs where people are passing stuff to one another as they do their jobs. Miscommunication slows down your cycle time of bringing products to market or bringing in new services to your stable of offerings. And you can't fix communication just by telling people to communicate more. That doesn't work. You're talking to a guy who understands that you've got to be able to understand the causes of the miscommunication and then find the solutions. And so you need to fix communication by firstly changing how people think when they communicate. That's their mindset. But then also changing what surrounds them while they're communicating, the culture and the climate in your business, the environment, if you like. So in this episode, we want to provide some practical shifts in both of those areas because there's a science-backed why behind each of these. And so I'm really talking to owners and leaders of teams in small and mid-sized businesses today. If you find yourself repeating tasks, if you find yourself holding unproductive meetings, if you find yourself making decisions and implementing them, but the outcomes go missing because your team haven't grasped what you wanted them to grasp. The team is talented, but they still miss what you wanted. They still don't catch where we need to go. Those are the areas that we want to look at and address as we redesign how we think, but also where messages live, if you like, in the environment of our business, so that we want clarity to become the default for all of our businesses. And clarity doesn't grow by accident. Clarity only grows by work. So let's talk about the mindset shifts first of all. What's going on in here as our employees, as our teams are communicating? It's, if you like, it's a software upgrade. What's going on the inside as we communicate? The first shift that needs to happen, and it needs to start with you as the team leader or the business owner, is to make a change from thinking about communication as sending information to people and turn it around to communication is creating shared meaning. Because when there's shared meaning, then communication has truly happened. If communication is simply sending out information, I think I've achieved it, but I'm not getting any feedback as to whether I did or not. So end your communication, whether it's an interaction with an individual employee or whether it's an all hands meeting, end it with a check back. Ask something like, so what are you taking from all this? Or what have you grasped as our first action in what we've talked about? Then you will be able to get feedback from and response from your team as to whether that communication has created meaning or not. So that's a mindset shift that we can all embrace. Second one would be to switch from convincing people to understanding people. So it's not about how hard can I push what I want in your direction to convince you to do what I'm telling you to do. It's more about how can I understand who you are and where you're coming from so that you can also understand me and what I'm desiring or what I'm aiming for. And then together we can work on those goals. So it lowers defensiveness. If I feel like you're trying to convince me of something, there's automatically a kind of wall of defensiveness that goes up in my insights. And it also activates a learning orientation because I want to understand you, and then you're drawn to want to understand me. And as the more we understand each other, the greater the communication effectiveness is going to be. It'll also surface any constraints faster. Maybe I need to understand that you're not able to do one portion of what it is I'm hoping you'll do. Or maybe it's that you don't have what you need to achieve a goal that we're working on together. Those kinds of constraints become easier to surface when we focus on understanding rather than convincing. So you can say to someone, rather than trying to convince them just to do what you're telling them, you could say, what would make this succeed for you? Or is there something you can see that I'm not noticing that you need to succeed with this? So those kinds of conversations are really valuable as we shift our mindset around communication. The third shift would be to start with trust rather than suspicion, but then to measure the outcomes as we move forward based on trust. When you reach partway through a project with someone, or you've trusted them to do what it is you've talked about, but then along the way you look at the results and you don't see the results you were expecting, you need to come into that with something like, the impact I'm seeing is fill in the blank. What were you targeting for? What were you aiming for? And see what feedback you get from that. So we're starting with trust that you can do what I'm asking, or you will achieve the goal that we're agreed on. But as we look at the results along the way, now we're measuring by outcomes. Tell me what outcome you were aiming for. It may be that we missed in our communication at the beginning. Let's catch that quickly as the outcomes maybe are deviating from what we expected. Fourth one would be to create a place of psychological safety so that people are not feeling like you're on them all the time, and then can speak up when the cost of silence is outweighing the cost of voicing their thoughts. In other words, if I keep quiet about this, then it's going to be a problem. But there's a culture of safety where I can speak up and name something that seems to be getting in the way or holding us back. And one of the best ways to create a culture of safety is when the leader speaks last. So when you're having a team meeting, when you're working on something together, you want to be the last one to speak, and also to model fallibility, to model a sense of secure curiosity. So you would say something like, I may be missing something, but what's the risk here of doing what we're doing? Or I may be missing a part of the picture, but it's looking like this to me. What do the rest of you see? Those kind of invitational fallibility constraints are what can really help us to create a sense of psychological safety, where people feel able to speak up rather than keep quiet for fear of what might be the cost. And then the fifth, maybe the most difficult one for a leader to embrace, would be to you be the leader of naming the elephant in the room. You want to state your assumptions. You want to state decisions and who has the right to make decisions. You want to state deadlines. All of those aloud. Make it clear what is the big issue on the table or in the room, because that creates space for vulnerability on your team, but it also it cultivates trust, because now we all know what the big issues are. We all know what the big challenges are, because you, the leader, have named them. hey, the big issue here is we might fail and it would cost us a ton of money, but I want to recognize that, and also to say that each of you has the right to speak up when you see that we may be moving towards that potential failure, so that we can catch it early. So you're naming the elephant in the room. Everybody's aware that this is a risky discussion we're having or a risky challenge that we're facing. But if you name the elephant in the room, you create an environment of trust. Those different mindset shifts are really valuable in growing communication and making things more likely that you'll succeed by communicating effectively. Now let's redesign some structures within your business. Let's talk about the hardware. If that was the software, the mindset that's going on when we're communicating, let's talk about some practical things you can implement that are environmental shifts within your business. So it's an upgrade of hardware, if you like. Number one would be to create 3 lanes for communication. Most interstate highways, especially in high traffic areas, have 3 lanes. And of course, here in America, we never use those lanes for the way they were designed. But if we did, there would be a slow lane for stuff that's moving slowly, a middle lane for getting past and fixing things that need to be fixed. And then there's a fast lane for anything that's really, really urgent, something with the sirens blaring and the lights flashing. So let's apply that to communication. The fast lane, if you like, lane 1 would be for urgent matters, anything that's really urgent. It's got to be dealt with synchronously within the team. In other words, everybody has to be aware of it at the same time. They can't be distracted by something else for us to address a challenge that's arisen or to shift a blockage that we're facing that's preventing us moving forward. So lane 1 needs to be at least everybody involved. So it might be a group phone call, or it may be some kind of stand-up meeting. It doesn't need to take long, but we all need to be on the same page. And that's the fast lane of communication. That is a lane that you should only use, ideally, when there's an urgent need. But that's lane 1. Lane 2, the middle lane, if you like, is for non-urgent communication that can be asynchronous. So I need to communicate something to everyone, but if you don't see it until lunchtime or you don't see it till end of day, that's okay, because this is information we're going to need as we move forward. So it might be something you'll play into tomorrow's activities or something by the end of the week, that kind of thing. And here technology can really help, because if you've got Slack channels or Teams threads that have clear subject lines, that can really help us to clarify the speed bumps on the journey or the project that we're working on, or they can also help us to share ideas that are going to benefit the whole team. So if it can be asynchronous, it's non-urgent, that's the best way to communicate that. Have channels that everybody who needs to have that information is included in, but they don't have to see it at the moment it lands. And then the third lane, the sort of the slow lane, if you like, is all of the knowledge that we're accumulating as a team, because that needs to be able to be referenced at any point that it's needed. The slow lane is the lane you enter and exit from, isn't it, on a highway? And in the same way, if we record decisions, but also document the answers to questions and challenges in some kind of searchable format, like a wiki, if you can create that knowledge base and expand that knowledge base, make it searchable so that everybody can reference it, now you're building a deep well of reference material that everybody can access. And the way you do that will vary according to your business or the project you're working on or the size of your team, but you can find plenty of technological examples out on the internet these days that will help you to do those things. So when you have those 3 lanes, it enables you to reduce context shifting. Nothing worse than calling an urgent meeting about a problem that we're facing and also talking about everybody putting in their vacation requests for next month, because they remember about the vacation request and then they forget about the urgent issue. That loses your message, and you keep the 3 speeds of communication in their specific lanes, because then you won't get wrecks. Most of the wrecks on the highway are caused by people not doing the right thing with the 3 lanes that are designed. So if in your communication structure you keep those 3 lanes clear and keep the communications in the right lanes, encourage people to have that kind of culture, that'll really help. A second environment shift is around the area of meetings. We have to have meetings on some levels, but most of us would know we've all been in meetings that could have been an email or could have been some kind of stand-up rather than a whole meeting. So for meetings, create a structure that forces clarity. This is essential in order that you don't increase miscommunication with all of your team. So you need to have an agenda with specific, distinct items, maybe even with a time scale attached to each item. We're going to address this item for 10 minutes in this meeting. Because these are the decisions we need to make. There need to be clear decision logs. There need to be clarity on the distinct items we're discussing. And then within the meeting, you can assign different roles to different people. You can have a meeting facilitator, the one who's keeping everything on track and moving the discussion forward. You can have a timekeeper, somebody who says, we've got 3 minutes left, we need to start making some decisions. You need to have a scribe who's recording what we decide and who's responsible for each decision. Creating structures like that resists individuals dominating the meeting, but it also defines the outcomes and reduces the drift that can so often happen when you put people in a meeting together. It also reduces, what could I call it, the sort of memory loss. Because when you have maybe 4 or 5 different decisions in a meeting, each person in that meeting is going to remember the decision that's most relevant to them or most significant to them, and then they'll forget maybe 2 or 3 of the other decisions. If you've got clear notes and clear responsibility for actions, that helps us to reduce that memory loss. So meetings need a clear structure, and I've got a handout that you can download. I'll talk about that in a minute. Third thing that you can change in your business environment is to help people to decrease brain overload. And often that comes down to having a physical space to decrease that brain overload, so that there will be specific places where you have huddle gatherings when you want to grab 3 or 4 folks and just brainstorm about something. Or you have other different specific places that are designated to be quiet zones, places where we can think, places where the contemplator language has the space needed to think deeply, at least for a time. Those kinds of things. You need, if you're on electronic communication, Zoom or Teams, you need to have decent microphones so you're not losing some of the words that are said, or you're not losing the tone of voice. There need to be soft acoustics in your workspace so that it's not resounding with all of the noise of everybody at once. There need to be sight lines to shared boards, particularly in a meeting, for example. If you're going to be putting information on a board, maybe drawing on a whiteboard or displaying something on a screen, there needs to be clear sight lines to that screen so that nobody is excluded from the information that you're displaying. Because when there's noise or when there's distance from visual information, that increases fatigue, and increased fatigue also increases error. And so those things are important to remember in the physical characteristics of your workspace. It's not just about does it look fancy or does it look consistent with your company's image? Is it providing the physical environment your employees need to be able to successfully communicate? And remember that a picture or a simple diagram is worth 1,000 words. So if you can say something with a diagram or some kind of infographic rather than 2 pages of just closely typewritten information, that's far more valuable to people. They'll grasp it more quickly, they'll take it more deeply in their understanding, and they'll be able to reproduce it more easily, particularly by showing that same diagram to others who need to know. And the fourth thing would be to build routines into your weekly schedule or your monthly schedule. Build routines that make voices heard. You don't want any voice in your company to go unheard for too long. So, for example, you could have a practice where everyone in your group shares their top outcome for the week. What's my top outcome that I'm aiming for this week? Only takes 10 seconds or maybe 30 seconds if it's a big group to explain. But then you could also add to that, you could have regular demo days where the team come together and they show the work that's in progress, and they're inviting input on what they're working on. That would be relevant to some of our businesses. And then another thing that's an interesting routine, if you like, in any meeting, appoint a contrarian. That's somebody who wants to who you want to challenge assumptions or point out inconsistencies. Somebody who's going to spend that meeting thinking like a devil's advocate, if you like, of how can I poke holes in this, or what's missing in this? And you need to rotate that role, because the contrarian is often unpopular in a team, but at the same time, they're essential, because you miss so much when you don't bring everyone's input to the table. And then if you have regular low stakes opportunities for people to speak up, that normalizes that you want there to be forthright input from the team. And you never lose when people tell you what's on their minds or what they're experiencing. You always win, because that's the kind of hardware upgrade where you have an environment where it's easy to speak up. And then the fifth thing that can so help speaking up, and again, it's an environmental issue, is to slay jargon. Because jargon in any company, in any setting, it separates those who understand the jargon from the rest of us. And that creates unwelcome surprises when somebody who didn't know what the jargon was suddenly finds that they did something wrong. But it also stifles the input that we were just talking about from everyone. 360-degree input is so vital to our success. It limits collaboration between teams. When different teams use different jargon, then it creates silos. So what you want to do environmentally is to create naming conventions. So these are folders on our storage, for example, or these are projects that we're working on, or these are the tags that we will use. If you label those different things consistently across the organization, then you'll be eliminating some of that jargon. And you can fight back when you encounter jargon by responding to somebody who's using jargon. Just say something like, "Hey, explain to me like I'm new." And then see how they remove some of that jargon and encourage that kind of communication. So those are 5 environmental shifts that we can make as well. And both of those things, the environmental changes and the mindset changes, will increase your communication effectiveness very quickly if you'll implement them. So my challenge to you as we wrap it up for this week is to pick one mindset shift and one environment shift or tweak, and run those for maybe 2 weeks and see what happens. I've got an action checklist that talks about the things that we've applied from this episode. I've also got a meeting roles sheet where that describes some of those meeting roles that I talked about. If you're a company or a leader who has lots of meetings, you might want to download that. So I'll put the link in the show notes. You can download them from there, and then give me feedback. Tell me what worked. Tell me what didn't. Tell me what other ideas you have for changing mindsets and changing environments so that the communication in our business can grow in mastery and effectiveness. So good luck with the challenges, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It would mean a lot to me if you'd rate and review the podcast so it helps more listeners to find us. But also, would you give me your feedback on things you'd like to hear about in future episodes? And remember to share the episode with a friend if you see something that would benefit them as well. You can reach me with feedback through my website at markburlinson.com. Just click on the contact button and send me a message. I respond to everyone personally, and I really want to hear from you. So thank you again for listening, sharing, reviewing, and giving me your feedback.